Hey guys, so in this video we are going to see how to make the turtles dive into the water and come back to the surface. So this is what we have, or what we are going to have at the end of the video. So you can see that some of the turtles are diving into the water, and this makes an obstacle for the player, because if the player is standing on the turtles, when they go underwater, the player will touch the water and drown. So it needs to be aware of this, or of which turtles are actually going underwater or not. From what I saw in the first level, it's only the first group of the turtles that goes underwater, and that's what I've implemented. Maybe we can change it later to like choose a random group of each one of the lanes to go underwater, but so far this is what we have. So I just selected the first group of each one of the lanes. The first group is the one that goes underwater. And let me show you how to do this. So first of all, I imported the animations. And like I showed you before, I had the animations in a sprite sheet with everything. So the default animation and the diving. And what I did was I imported the images and then divided only the frames that I needed. So I removed all the default frames. I extended also the animations to 200 milliseconds, and you see that now I have 3 animations to make the turtle dive. So I have a dive animation, that's actually the turtle going underwater, and then I have a rise animation, which is the exact opposite. So I just changed the frames order, so to make the turtle rise from the water back to the surface. And I created a new animation called underwater, which is an empty frame, and I actually had to create a frame. I actually had to create a frame for an empty frame, like an empty image, and import the image to create this animation. I don't know. I was expecting that I could like add a frame and make the frame transparent or invisible or something like that, but it actually doesn't seem to support that. And why do I have all these animations separated? Because I could have, okay, the diving animation, staying underwater and coming back to the surface in all a single animation. And my idea here, I haven't implemented yet that behavior, but my idea here is to use that trick that we saw before of assigning a collision group to a specific animation. So what I'm going to do is that the player will collide with the turtle when it's using the default animation, the dive or the rise, but as soon as the turtle is underwater, I'm going to change the collision group of this specific animation to stop colliding with the player. And so if the player is standing on the turtle and no longer collides with the turtle, then it falls into the water and it dies. At least that was the idea, and that's why I separated all the animations. So this was the first thing. So I added all the animations, and then I added, let me see, then I added a new behavior that I call turtle, which is like the main behavior for the turtles. And in this turtle, I add a new event, a dive, a custom event. And once again, we have custom blocks and custom events. From what I understand, you use custom blocks when you want to pass parameters or arguments to inside the block, like we did before when we were moving the turtles. And you use custom events when you don't need to pass anything into the need to pass any input values into the block. And also, one thing I realized is that you can call custom events on specific actors. So I can say, like we are going to do, like I'm going to say to only the turtles of the first group, I'm going to say to them, okay, now you start diving. That's why we have this event. But I'm not going to call it on all the other turtles. But when you use a custom block, it seems that you are calling that behavior, you are calling that function on all the sprites, because at least I haven't seen it so far, a way to say, oh, okay, I want to use this custom block only on this sprite, on this actor. So I think this is also a difference between these custom events and custom blocks. In this case, I don't have parameters to pass into it, and I want to say or to call this function on specific actors. That's why I'm using a custom event. And what I'm doing here is that this is to play the animation. So I'm using let me just break this down. So I'm using a block do every seconds, and here I'm using a time interval. And you can see that I created an attribute called time interval that I'm going to set before calling the dive. And a time interval is basically, when I did the first time, I was using 3 seconds or 2 seconds, at least that was the value that I saw on the original game. But if the turtles are using exactly the same time to go underwater and come back, then they are synchronized on both on different lanes. And it seemed really weird. So I just added like a random value to and assign to the time interval. So each group is going to wait a different time to go underwater and come back than the other group. And you'll see in just a bit how I set this time interval. Oh, because I was saying that I didn't need to pass arguments or parameters into this block, but I actually needed to pass. And I tried to use with a custom block. I said like, okay, I want a custom block like dive every amount of seconds. And I implemented that custom block, but then I had the problem that I couldn't call the custom block only on the turtles that I wanted. And that's why I came back to the event, to the custom event, and created an attribute that I'm going to change the attribute value before actually calling the event. So we're going to see that in just a bit. So what this is doing is that every, let's say, 2 seconds, which is one of the values, every 2 seconds, I'm going to make the turtle dive. And how am I making this? So first, I'm switching the animation to the dive, to start the animation dive. Then I wait for that animation to finish. So I wait 0.4 seconds. And why this is this value? Because we have 2 frames with 200 milliseconds each. So I wait for the animation to finish. Then I switch to the animation underwater. And then I do basically the same to come back again. So I wait for the animation for 0.2 seconds for the animation for the turtle to stay underwater. So I make it dive, I wait for it to dive, I wait for 0.2 seconds while the turtle is underwater, and then I switch back. Then I switch back to the rise, wait for the rise to finish, and change it again to the default animation, and set the default animation back to 0 to start again from the beginning. And this is it. And so what's going to happen is that all this, so this is the entire animation. This is the way I'm combining the 3 animations that we created, like a dive, underwater, and rise. And what I'm doing is that I'm running this every 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. One thing to keep in mind here is that you need to, the time that we are putting here, we need to take into account the total time that these transitions take. So in this case, they are taking 0.4, 0.4, 0.2. So they are taking 1 second total. So the total animation of diving and rising is taking 1 second. So if we want our animation to play, let's say, every 2 seconds, we need to take into account that this is going to take 1 second. So the actual value that we need to use is the value that we want plus the total time that the animation is running, because otherwise it's going to wait, let's say, for 1 second, and if the animation also takes 1 second, they are going to start at the same time. So I'm going to run the animation takes 1 second, and I'm also waiting for that time while the animation is running. So let's say, for example, if I wait for 1 second, and the animation takes 1 second, then it's always repeating the animation. It never comes back to the other one. So just keep this in mind. When you are doing something like this, you need to take into account the total time of the animation and add it to the actual value that you want. And I'm going to put this here. Okay, so this is what the code that makes the turtle dive. And now, since I'm using a custom event, this code only runs when we call it from some other place. And where we are going to do that is in the turtle spawner. This is where I'm saying for the turtles to dive, or I'm saying to which turtles I want to dive, because only the first group of each line is going to dive, and that's what we are doing here. So, and how are we going to do that? So basically what we want to do, what does that, is this code right here. I'm not going to remove it because then I don't know. Okay, it's here. So inside, when we are creating the turtles, some of them we are going to say, okay, now you are going to start diving. And the way to see that is that, okay, if it's the first group of each one of the lanes, Then initially I was using the current loop count of the repeat group count, because the first group is going to be 0, the other one is going to be 1, 2, 3, and so forth. So I was just using the current loop count here, and if the current loop count is equal to 0, which means that it's the first group, then I'm going to make the turtles dive. But the problem here is that it seems that since we have like nested groups, repeat groups, when I'm using, even if I select this current loop count and use it here, I end up using, or it ends up using the current loop count of the repeat block that's of the last one. I mean, where that block is inside. So it seems that this value is overriding the other one, and so I end up using the loop count here. And so what was happening was that when I tried to use the current loop count from the group, I was actually telling the first turtle of each group to dive and not the first group of turtles. So I needed to create a workaround around this problem. Was that I created a new attribute that I called group index, and before I start creating the group, I just set the group index to the current loop count. So this group index is has exactly the same value as the current loop count, but then I can use the group index here, and it actually has the correct value. So this is like a workaround for this current loop count being overridden. And so if the group count or the group index is equal to 0, meaning that it's the first group of turtles, then I do two things. First one is for the last created actor, so I'm choosing the last created turtle. Yeah, I'm saying it's a turtle because it was the last created actor of the entire game. So for the last created actor, I'm setting the time interval, which was this attribute that I created on the turtle. And I'm setting the time interval to the dive time interval. And what is this dive time interval? This is another attribute that I've created to just set to a random value. So before creating the group, I set the dive time interval to a random value between 2 and 4. And this is going to be the value that the turtle is going to use here on do every second. And before telling the turtle to dive, I'm setting the time interval to that random value. And why am I using a variable here and I'm not using a random value here? Because I could just take this random float and add it here instead of the variable. When I say variable, is an attribute, it's the same. Why am I not doing that? Because if we use the random float here, what this would make is that each turtle would have a different value. So each turtle inside the same group, each turtle would use different time intervals, and so they would not be in sync. So the way to do it is that we need to generate only one value and apply that time interval to all the turtles in that group. So for the turtle, I set the time interval to that random value, and then I trigger the event dive, which is the event that we created in our turtle behavior, in behavior turtle, for the last created actor. So I'm choosing a random value and I'm saying the turtle, okay, start diving. That's what the event does. And that's it. I mean, this is what makes the turtle dive. And let me see. And yes, I mean, the only thing that makes this a little bit more complicated is like having this needing to create like these attributes before running the repeat block. Like the dive time interval, it's okay, but the group index, I shouldn't have to do this. Like I should be able to use just the current loop count here and not creating a new attribute to just store that value so that I can use it forward. So that's a little bit like cumbersome. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I don't know. Maybe I made some mistake. I cannot say that I didn't make any mistake, but this was the way I found that it works. And what else? I wanted to talk about something else about this daytime interval. Oh yes, I figured it out that one of the problems that I had that was in my implementation is that I should probably be using groups of turtles. So an actor, an actor would be like an entire group of turtles. Because we are actually dealing with the groups of turtles and not the turtles separately. And that was my mistake. Instead of creating using just a single turtle to create the groups, because right now I'm having a lot of trouble or some problems, not a lot, but some problems because we have the turtles all separated. And one of them was this random float. Because if I had groups of turtles, I could just add that random float here instead of using a time interval and generating a time interval, because each group would have like this turtle behavior, like maybe a turtle group behavior, and each group would generate a random time interval for the entire group. Because if I try to generate a random float here or do every second, what would happen once again was that like each turtle would have a different time interval and then wouldn't be in sync when they are going down and up. But I mean, it works. But yeah, probably a better way to do this was to create an entire group of turtles. It makes some sense, but it also works, so there's no need to change it now. And this is it. I mean, this is the turtles diving, and next I'm going to deal with hopping the frog to top of the turtle and being transported by the turtles while they are moving. So that's it. Thank you, guys.